who slipped past every security protocol undetected. Hello to the quiet ones, the unremarkable ones, the ones who mastered the art of being underestimated while running calculations that would crash their entire system. Hello to you, because they never saw it coming, did they? They looked at your cardigan and your reading glasses and your soft-spoken politeness and filed you under safe, harmless, controllable. They saw the surface and assumed they knew the depth. They watched you organize their files and thought you were just another good little worker bee, another predictable pattern in their database. But here's what they missed while they were busy dismissing you, while they were laughing at your quiet demeanor and your preference for books over parties. You were doing something they couldn't even comprehend. You were learning, not the shallow performative learning they praised in their conferences and seminars. No, you were reverse engineering their entire operational system from the inside. You were mapping neural pathways they didn't know existed. You were cracking codes they didn't realize they were broadcasting. Every conversation you had, every meeting you sat through nodding politely, every moment they thought you were just listening, you were recording, analyzing, decoding the patterns behind their words. They thought your silence meant you had nothing to say, but your silence was a scanning protocol. You weren't quiet because you were timid. You were quiet because you were processing data at speeds they couldn't match, while they talked and talked and talked, revealing their insecurities and their tactics and their fears wrapped in confidence. You were building a complete psychological profile of everyone in the room. They saw a librarian. You were running reconnaissance. They saw someone harmless, sorting information. You were weaponizing knowledge they freely handed you because they never imagined someone like you could be dangerous. And that right there, that was your greatest asset. The ability to hide in plain sight while operating on frequencies they couldn't detect. You dressed like you belonged in the background, spoke like you needed permission, moved through their world like you were just grateful to be included. But behind those glasses, behind that carefully constructed exterior of normalcy, your mind was running operations they would classify as classified. You weren't just absorbing information, you were cross-referencing it, finding the contradictions, spotting the lies, tracking the patterns of manipulation they used. So casually they forgot it was manipulation. You saw how they controlled people with praise and punishment, how they built hierarchies based on insecurity, how they kept everyone fighting for scraps while they hoarded the real power. And you didn't react, didn't expose them, didn't give away what you were seeing, because that's what amateurs do. You played the long game. You let them think they were winning while you quietly assembled the blueprint of their entire infrastructure. They never suspected that the person they barely noticed, the one they asked to fetch coffee and organize spreadsheets, was the most dangerous intelligence in the building. They couldn't fathom that someone who looked so ordinary could be running mental simulations of 17 different scenarios while nodding along to their presentations. They didn't know you were 3 steps ahead, 5 moves deeper, operating on a level of strategic thinking they would need a decade to understand. And here's the beautiful part. You didn't need to prove it. You didn't need their validation or their recognition because you weren't performing for their applause. You were gathering intel. You were building power. in silence. You were becoming untouchable while they were busy being visible. And now they're starting to feel it, aren't they? Something shifted. The air changed. You're still wearing the same clothes, still speaking in the same measured tone, but something in your energy makes them pause now, makes them second guess, makes them wonder what exactly they missed. Let's talk about what you really were doing all those years. They thought you were just existing in their periphery. You weren't building a career. You weren't climbing their ladder. You were conducting an experiment. Every interaction was a test. Every conversation was data collection. Every moment they ignored you or talked down to you or treated you like you were just another face in the crowd. You were logging it, categorizing it, understanding exactly how their system of control operated. They handed you the keys to their kingdom because they never imagined the quiet one would know what to do with them. They gave you access to their files, their communications, their strategies, because you seemed so safe, so trustworthy, so incapable of using any of it against them. And you didn't use it against them. Not in the way they would understand. You used it to build something else entirely, a parallel understanding, a shadow knowledge, a complete map of their psychological infrastructure. You learned how to read people not by what they said, but by what they carefully didn't say. You learned to spot the micro-expressions, the tone shifts, the body language tells that revealed the truth behind their performance. You became fluent in the language of manipulation while they thought you barely spoke at all. You understood power dynamics before they finished explaining the org chart. You saw through their titles and their suits and their manufactured authority to the insecurity and fear that actually drove their decisions. And the more you understood, the more invisible you became, because true power doesn't announce itself. Real intelligence doesn't need recognition. You operated in the space between their attention and their awareness, gathering everything while giving away nothing. They thought you were simple because you didn't compete for their spotlight. They thought you were weak because you didn't fight for their approval. They had no framework for understanding someone who didn't need anything from them. Meanwhile, you were learning their patterns so thoroughly you could predict their reactions before they had them. You knew what they would say in meetings before they opened their mouths. You understood their triggers, their fears, their desperate need for control, masquerading as confidence. You saw how they used fear to manage people, how they leveraged insecurity to maintain hierarchy, how they built entire careers on making others feel small. And you absorbed all of it, not to replicate it, but to immunize yourself against it. You became ungovernable, not through rebellion, but through comprehension. They couldn't manipulate someone who understood manipulation better than they did. They couldn't intimidate someone who had already mapped every intimidation tactic in their arsenal. They couldn't control someone who had reverse engineered the control mechanisms and found them laughably primitive. You want to know what really happened? You didn't just survive their system, you transcended it. You moved beyond needing their validation or fearing their judgment. You stopped operating in their reality and started building your own. And they felt it even if they couldn't name it. Suddenly, the person they barely noticed had a presence that made them uncomfortable. Suddenly, your silence felt less like submission and more like assessment. Suddenly, your compliance seemed less like weakness and more like strategy. They started wondering what you were thinking. They started feeling exposed when you looked at them. They started realizing too late that maybe, just maybe, they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. Because here's the truth about people who underestimate the quiet ones. By the time they realize their mistake, the quiet one has already won. You weren't playing their game. You were studying it, mastering it, and preparing to dismantle it from the inside out. The cardigan and the glasses weren't camouflage, they were operational cover. The politeness wasn't weakness, it was access control. The way you faded into the background wasn't insecurity, it was tactical positioning. You were hiding in plain sight, and they never once considered that maybe someone was hiding on purpose. They confused your stillness for passivity, when it was actually perfect control. They mistook your observation for awkwardness when it was reconnaissance. They saw what you wanted them to see while you cataloged everything they couldn't hide. And now that you've gathered enough data, now that you've mapped every vulnerability in their system, now that you understand them better than they understand themselves, you're starting to move differently. Not louder, not more aggressively, just differently, with precision, with purpose, with the calm certainty of someone who knows exactly where all the bodies are buried because they watched everyone bury them. They're experiencing something now that's breaking their brains' cognitive dissonance at a scale they can't process. Because how do you reconcile the person you dismissed with the presence you're suddenly afraid of? How do you square the harmless librarian with the strategic mind that clearly sees through every move you make? Their reality is glitching. The comfortable narrative they built around you, the safe little box they put you in with a label that said, "Not a threat," is cracking. And they don't know what to do with that. They can't admit they were wrong because that would mean confronting how blind they've been. They can't acknowledge your intelligence without admitting they missed it completely. So instead, they do what people always do. When their worldview is challenged, they get uncomfortable. They get suspicious. They start watching you differently. But by then, it's too late. You've already seen everything you needed to see. You know what's eating them alive right now. It's not what you did. It's what you could have done. It's the dawning realization that you had access, opportunity, knowledge, and they have no idea what you did with it. They're replaying every interaction, every conversation, every moment they spoke freely around you as if you weren't there. They're wondering what you heard, what you understood, what you filed away. They're questioning whether those quiet nods were agreement or analysis. They're second-guessing every time they dismissed your input or talked over you or treated you like you were intellectually inferior. Because now they're starting to suspect what you already know. That you were never inferior. You were just operating on a different frequency entirely. You were running calculations while they were running their mouths. You were building frameworks while they were building egos. Here's what they can't handle. You never needed to prove you were smart. You never needed to compete in their performative intelligence contests. You never needed to dominate conversations or flex your knowledge because you understood something they didn't. That real power is silent. True intelligence doesn't announce itself. Actual strategic thinking happens in the spaces between words. While they were fighting to be the loudest voice in the room, you were becoming the most aware consciousness in it. While they measured success by who could talk the longest, You measured understanding by who could see the furthest. They were playing checkers on the surface. You were playing three-dimensional information warfare in the depths, and they never knew because you never told them. You just kept observing, kept learning, kept building a mental model of their entire operational system while they thought you were just quiet. The thing about underestimation is it's a gift if you know how to use it. They gave you invisibility. You turned it into omniscience. They gave you dismissal. You turned it into freedom. They gave you silence. You turned it into a listening post. Every time they overlooked you, every time they talked around you like you weren't there, every time they shared information they would have guarded from someone they considered a threat, they were feeding you intelligence they didn't know they were leaking. You became the person in the room who knew everything while saying nothing. You became the hidden variable in every equation they tried to solve. You became the unknown factor that invalidated all their calculations. And the beautiful irony is, they did it to themselves. They created their own blind spot by assuming you weren't worth watching. Now they're starting to notice. But they don't know what they're noticing. It's just a feeling at first. A vague unease when you're around. They can't put their finger on it. You didn't change your clothes or your tone or your behavior. You're still the same person they've always ignored. But something's different. Maybe it's the way you don't react anymore when they expect reaction. Maybe it's the way their manipulation tactics slide off you like water off glass. Maybe it's the way you seem completely unbothered by things that used to make you shrink. Maybe it's the way you look at them now, not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of clinical assessment that makes them feel like specimens under observation. Whatever it is, it's making them recalibrate. It's forcing them to question their initial assessment. It's making them wonder if maybe the person they thought was beneath them has been above them all along. Let me tell you what actually happened during all those years you spent being invisible. You weren't just observing, you were evolving. Every dismissal was a lesson in human behavior. Every condescending interaction was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Every time they underestimated you, you gained another piece of the puzzle. You were learning how power really works, not the sanitized version they teach in business schools, but the raw mechanics of control, influence, and domination. You saw how people use information as currency, how they leverage relationships as weapons, how they build entire empires on making others feel inferior. And you didn't just see it, you understood it at a molecular level. You reverse engineered their entire playbook while they thought you were just taking notes. Here's what they're terrified of now. You know their system better than they do. You understand their tactics because you've cataloged every variation. You can predict their moves because you've mapped their patterns. You're immune to their manipulation because you've studied the source code. They can't gaslight you because you know exactly what they're doing and why. They can't intimidate you because you've analyzed the psychology behind intimidation and found it wanting. They can't control you because you've identified every lever they use for control and neutralized them all. You're not playing by their rules anymore because you've seen the rules are arbitrary, designed to benefit those who wrote them while keeping everyone else confused and compliant. And once you see that, once you really understand that their authority is just consensus, reality maintained through collective agreement to pretend it's real, you can't unsee it. You became dangerous the moment you stopped needing their approval. You became untouchable The moment you stopped fearing their judgment, you became unstoppable the moment you realized their power over you was always illusory, maintained only by your belief in it. And the second you stopped believing, the second you saw through the performance to the insecurity underneath, the whole structure collapsed. Not externally, not visibly, but internally where it mattered. You freed yourself from their matrix while still walking through it. You operated in their world without being of it. You played the game without letting the game play you. And that's what they sense now. That you're no longer bound by the invisible chains that hold everyone else in place. You're still physically present but psychologically elsewhere, operating from a framework they can't access or control. They're starting to ask questions now. Carefully, indirectly, trying to figure out what changed. What happened to you? You seem different. Is everything okay? Why are you so quiet? But here's what they're really asking. Why don't our usual tactics work on you anymore? Why aren't you reacting the way we've programmed people to react? Why do you seem completely unaffected by the social pressures that keep everyone else in line? What do you know that we don't? And you're not telling them, are you? You're just smiling that small, knowing smile that makes them even more uncomfortable. You're maintaining the same exterior while running completely different internal software. You're giving them nothing while seeing everything. You're the Black Ops agent who never broke cover, but everyone somehow knows is more than they appear. The brilliance of your strategy is its simplicity. You didn't fight them. You didn't expose them. You didn't try to tear down their system from the outside. You just stopped participating in the illusion. You stopped giving them the reactions they needed to maintain their narrative. You stopped playing the role they assigned you. You stopped being predictable, controllable, understandable, and in a world built on predictability, in a system designed around control, in a hierarchy maintained through understanding and categorizing everyone. Being unpredictable and uncontrollable and incomprehensible is the ultimate form of power. You're the glitch they can't patch. You're the variable they can't account for. You're the error message that shouldn't exist, but keeps appearing in their calculations. Now here's where it gets interesting. Now they're the ones being observed. The tables didn't just turn. They shattered and reassembled in a completely different configuration. You're not looking at them with fear or admiration anymore. You're looking at them with the cool, detached curiosity of a researcher studying behavior patterns, and they feel it. Oh, they feel it. Suddenly they're self-conscious around you. Suddenly they're explaining themselves when you didn't ask for explanation. Suddenly they're seeking your approval even though they'd never admit it. Suddenly your silence has more weight than their words. What happened is simple but profound. You stopped being the subject of observation and became the observer. And they don't know how to exist in a world where they're not the center of attention and judgment. Every meeting you sit in now, every conversation you're part of, they're aware of you in a way they never were before. They notice when you're not impressed. They notice when you see through their performance. They notice when their usual charisma or authority or manipulation tactics hit your presence and just evaporate like they were never there. You've become the test they're failing without understanding what's being tested. And it's driving them slowly insane because they built their entire identity on being the smartest person in the room, the most powerful presence, the one everyone else orbits around. But you're not orbiting. You're not even in their solar system anymore. You're operating from a complete